So welcome to Bloody Disgusting Presents Mike Mignola panel. We're here to celebrate. We're here to celebrate the 20th anniversary of Hellboy and talk to Mike about all his upcoming books at Dark Horse, all the projects he's got going on. So we'll give a kind of brief overview of what he's got going on, and then we'll open it up to questions. So I guess if you want to start, it is the 20th anniversary of Hellboy. Did you ever think that you'd be here 20 years later talking about this character in the early days?
No. I figured I would do one miniseries and then limp back to DC, and I figured at that time I could still do Batman books and things like that, but I honestly, I did Hellboy so that on my deathbed I'd be able to say at least once I did a book that was me doing what I wanted to do. So it never occurred to me, well, I shouldn't say it never occurred to me. There was the possibility that it could turn into something. I certainly hoped it would turn into something, but before I did Hellboy, I'd never done any one character for more than a year. So the idea that I designed something that I still enjoyed going for 20 years, you know, and let alone the business end of it, you know, would I be able to do something that would, you know, pay, so, you know, I could continue to do it. I hoped for it. In a way, I planned for it a little bit in that I designed the characters that I thought would be fun to draw. That's why he's not a regular guy. My first idea was draw a regular guy who investigates monster stuff. But I thought, nah, I'll get bored drawing a regular guy. So let me design this monster that'll be fun to draw, have him fight monsters. If it works, I'm stuck drawing monsters, which is what I wanted to do. So, you know, there was a little thought that went into it. But, you know, it's a roll of the dice if it's gonna catch on, if it's gonna work.
Now, in recent years, you've really had a creator-owned revolution happen in comics. Back then, you know, there wasn't an emphasis on creator-owned projects and things like that. Was it kind of scary at the time to make the jump from the big two to a creator-owned project?
Not at all. I hadn't burned my bridges with DC Comics, so I knew I could go back. And there actually was a real strong creator-owned thing going on then. Image had come out a couple years before, and then this second wave of us, I mean, I went in with a group of guys to Dark Horse. Frank Miller was already there, and Frank was spearheading our little group. So we had John Byrne, Frank Miller, Mike Allred, Jeff Darrow, Dave Gibbons, Art Adams. We had a lot of real heavy hitter guys. Half of those guys were already doing creator-owned stuff. We just said, hey, we'll add Art Adams, Mike Mignola, blah, 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 cobble us together into a group, be our own imprint at Dark Horse. So probably I benefited more than anybody else because I was the least well-known of this group of heavy hitter guys. So I don't know what would have happened had I gone to Dark Horse without them. I think Dark Horse, because they wanted me to work for them, I think Dark Horse would have probably published Hellboy. But would anyone have noticed? But because I was part of this legend group, their idea for a name, not mine, because I was part of that group, I was lumped in with Frank and John Byrne and Art Adams, you know, so the book got a lot more attention than it might have, you know, otherwise, or certainly more attention than it would have gotten otherwise. So I probably benefited more than anybody else from that group association.
So then, right now you're concentrating your full efforts on Hellboy and the Hellboy universe books. Is there anything left for you to do that you haven't done, or is it kind of, at this point, you're just gonna, you know, continue to focus on the books, like the Hellboy books?
Yeah, I mean, within the Hellboy universe, there's still plenty of stuff to do. There's no part of me that has any interest in going back and doing Marvel DC stuff again. You know, for 20 years, I've been left alone to do whatever I want. And I can't imagine anything making me turn my back on that. You get pretty spoiled 20 years of doing whatever the hell you want. So there's stuff I want to do within the Hellboy world. There are a couple characters that I plan to write that haven't had their own books. So I'm going to be doing some of that stuff. But really, now that I've killed Hellboy off and he's in hell, it really is my dream book. I mean, I can do whatever the hell I want, and that's what I plan to do.
So then talk a little bit about Hellboy in Hell, and you're coming back to it in December. Can you tell us a little bit about the direction that you're going to take the book in following that?
he continues to be dead. He continues to be in hell. He's going to run into some people he's run into before, and he's going to meet a whole other bunch of other guys. One of the things I want to do in Hellboy in Hell is something I did a lot in the Hellboy short stories. I want to roam Hellboy around. And it was always my idea with the short stories that Hellboy had roamed around the entire world. So he had been in every corner of the world and interacted with every different kind of folklore, creature, monster, mythology. And I'm going to continue that in Hell. The beauty of doing it in Hell is when he wanders into the Asian neighborhood of Hell, it doesn't need to look like real Japan or real China. So it saves a lot of work when it comes to reference. Because I don't know what the hell a door looks like in Japan. I don't know how those doors work. But if he's in the Hell version of Asia, I still want to capture the spirit of the Asian folklore and the Asian mythologies, and it's some of the most spectacularly odd creatures. But I get to play fast and loose with it. So again, while I've got certain big story idea things I want to do, a lot of what Hellboy in Hell is meant to be is him going in and me doing these kind of pseudo-adaptations of various folk tales from all over the world. I want to do India, I want to do Asia, I want to do, basically I want to do everything.
Does it allow you as a creator to kind of play with different people's perceptions of what hell really is?
I don't really care about that kind of stuff. I look at hell not necessarily as this is the mythological hell, even though I'm going to do the Greek underworld. I'm looking at hell as basically my playground. It's where I get to do everything, So if I'm going to do an Asian folktale, it's not necessarily Hellboy going to the Asian version of the underworld. It's just Hellboy going to Asia, except it's much weirder the way it looks and happens.
So then let's delve into Abe Sapien. Can you tell us a little bit about where he's headed in his ongoing title?
Well, not really, because I'm the co-writer on that book, which in almost the case with all the books, I've had lengthy discussions with the real writer of the book, where this character needs to go and what kind of things he needs to do. But the specifics of the story, for the most part, I'm leaving to Scott Alley on Abe Sapien. There's some things I know about. There's some certain things that Abe's got to do, and certain big picture stuff with Abe that I can't give away. The one thing I can say is Abe was designed to contrast BPRD, even though they're the same world, since we're pretty much screwing up the entire planet. And John on BPRD, his focus is the big stuff, big team stuff, big machines, big action things. He didn't allow for a lot of real quiet stories. And Scott Alley, who's been with me on Hellboy almost from the beginning, Scott and I are both ghost story guys. We're both, occult guys. John's much more of a action, military kind of guy. But we can do monster stuff, great. But Scott is a small story guy, he's a mood atmosphere guy. So I said, the beauty of him doing Abe is we'll get much more supernatural oriented stories, and we'll get one man on the ground traveling around, road trip style. We'll get this one man walking across the earth, encountering smaller stuff. Whereas BPRD, just the nature of BPRD, mostly it's going to be bigger stuff.
Now with Scott and John, do you have kind of a long form roadmap of where you want to take each character?
More so with Scott, with Abe, because Abe has very specific functions. And when we started talking about Abe, we'd actually said, let's do 4 trade paperbacks worth of material about Abe. And then I realized, well, that does what we need to do with Abe, but it ties Scott's hands. So I said, let's not have a specific number of books. You have as much room. Again, you have certain places you have to go with the character, but take as much time as you want to get to those particular places. BPRD, while we again have big picture ideas of what has to happen, there's no wheel-type roadmap. So it's like, well, this character's going to do this, then this. Except that maybe somewhere in the middle, something else happens. So maybe those, instead of those, those roadmap things being this close together, maybe there's 18 issues between them. So I don't want to tie anybody's hands. You want this thing to be organic. You want it to breathe. So if certain things take on a life of their own, you want to be able to incorporate that.
So then, tell us a little bit about the artist edition that you have coming out from our IDW. What was it like for you as a creator to work on that project, and how is it for you to give kind of a revealing look to your artistic process?
I think it'll be cool. It's gonna suck for anybody who wants to read it because all the lettering is done on the computer. So we made the decision to take all the lettering out. So what you'll get is as close as what most people will get to seeing the original art. If anybody's not familiar, the artist editions are where they shoot, as much as possible, they shoot from the original art. So you see, it's all halftone scans of the original pages. You'll see all the notes, you'll see all the whiteout, you'll see all the little notes to the editor and all that kind of stuff. So we'll be doing the 5 issues of Hellboy and Hell, plus some older stuff.
So if we were to take a look at your art table right now, what would we find you working on?
You'd find it covered in plastic because we just had a mold issue. So instead of being home working, I've had guys in there tearing out the wall of the bathroom and tearing out the wall of the studio, getting closer and closer to built-in bookcases on my drawing table. And it's just been me for a week going, please God, find the end of the mold. If you keep going any further, it's really going to be bad. So that's, right now, we're all draped in plastic. But what should be there is the beginning of issue 6 of Hellboy and Hell.
Oh, wow.
That's the next thing up.
Cool. So then, I guess to wrap it up before we open it up to the audience for questions, your creations have made the transition into films, animation, collectibles. Is there any medium left that you want to take a stab at playing around in?
I'm a book guy. It's always been my goal just to do the book. The book is the only thing that I can control, so my focus is always the book. Things come up, people say, can we use Hellboy for this? Can we use Hellboy for that? Sometimes that stuff's interesting. There's a company that I can't think of the name of right off the top of my head, but I've actually got the flyers for them on my table. They're doing replicas of various objects that have been in Hellboy. Things like various charms and things you've seen in the book. Excuse me. So they're doing a whole line of replicas of things that are in the Hellboy books. And the packaging is beautiful. They look like, archaeological things. Little bags, little tags on them that say where they were found, and it's a really cool set of objects. But for the most part, that's not my goal. I never pursue any of that stuff. Some of the stuff comes my way, and if I think it's cool, I'll say yes. But as far as the movie and all that stuff, that's completely somebody else's thing. I have no say about that. I have input if they make them, but I have no power to make these things happen. All those rights, are somebody else's.
Cool. Well, do you want to open it up to the?
Please. How about in front?
Since you just finished saying about how you care most about the book and all your work is in the books, how do you feel about the adaptations of the movies in comparison to your original work?
I think I made out pretty well. In the scheme of things, I think the thing I'm happiest about with the films is that for the most part, people that are fans of the comic are fans of the film, which I don't know who worried about it more, me or Del Toro, probably me. When Guillermo made the decision to change some of the relationships in the comic, which I understood why he was doing it. It was like, okay, that might reach a wider audience, but is it going to piss off the people who actually know the comic? And it turns out, for the most part, the people rolled with those changes pretty well. So I'm happy that it didn't completely piss off, the book buying public. So but there are bits I would have done differently. But I think they're pretty true to at least the spirit. I was very lucky to have a guy who was a fan of the comic, who understood what the comic was. And there.
You worked on my favorite Disney movie, Atlantis.
I don't hear that very often.
I mean, I'm also a huge fan of Hellboy, but Atlantis is my favorite Disney movie. What exactly was it like working on, working with Disney, and how much of what you designed ended up in the film?
Yeah, if anybody, if you heard the question, I guess what was I technically called, an art director, I guess, on a Disney film called Atlantis, which probably most of you have never heard of. It was not one of their bigger hits. It was very weird. I mean, it's weird to get a message on your answering machine saying, "Hi, this is Don Hahn," which is funny already. Don Hahn, that's a made-up name. I'm at Disney. I'm a producer at Disney, and we're doing a picture, and we'd like to do it in your style. Give me a call, and you go, I'll return that call, because that's a weird message. And for the most part, I did do quite a bit of design on the city, but it was a very strange process, because when I went in, they'd already designed the characters, but they were adapting the characters into my style. So you would see, the Disney versions of these characters, and then you'd see someone else had designed them to look like Mike Mignola versions of those Disney characters. So that was really weird. And mostly I would just go to meetings and talk. When we started settling on what the city of Atlantis looked like, I did do a lot of drawings for the city of Atlantis. My biggest contribution, and I thought I was scamming these guys. Because I was, they'd fly me in for a couple of days, they'd put me in an office, they'd say, you get there at 10 in the morning, they go, well, there's a meeting at 2:30, is that okay with you? And you're like, what am I doing till then? As a comics guy, you're drawing all the time to get this stuff done. But there was a lot of just, guys talking and just sitting around your office and twiddling your thumbs. The point what I was going to make? Oh, so I thought I was scamming these guys. So I'm getting a paycheck by the hour to work on this stuff, and mostly not doing much. And then one day, we had talked about the city of Atlantis and basing it kind of on the Angkor Wat ruins and the ideas that we'd have these big statues with roots and stuff growing all over them. And just off the top of my head, I said, yeah, when we built this big climax at the end of the movie, wouldn't it be cool if these statues that the guys have been tripping over are actually the Atlantean Armada? So my favorite expression I used on the picture, and you don't see it in their the promotional stuff too much, is, at the climax of the movie, all these things, wake up and they start flying around, and everybody, wets their pants. Everything I was saying, you do this, and then everybody wets their pants, and they're going, that's not usually the approach we take, but if you really want people to wet their pants, that was my goal on that picture. So when I came up with that idea, and suddenly that became like the last quarter of the movie, I kind of went, well, they got their money's worth that day. Unfortunately, my whole thing was building to this certain kind of climax, where you get the reveal that, oh shit, those statues are actually flying machines. And then the city of Atlantis we designed, so all we saw was the tip of the city of Atlantis. And again, one of my big crap their pants ideas is, at the end, the waters recede, or Atlantis rises up, and what we thought was the city of Atlantis is just the tip of this massive city. So what changes did they make in that picture at literally the last minute? You start the movie with those flying vehicles, and you show all of the city of Atlantis. So when you get to Atlantis, those things are tripping over, everybody's going, hey, aren't those things that were flying around in the very first second of the movie? And, oh, what happened to the city of Atlantis? It's only this big. We already saw how big it is. So, oh well. But it was their thing, it was cool, it was weird to work on it. It's strange, if I had a resume, I guess it'd be cool to have Disney on my resume. But, it was fun. Not a huge time thing for me, but it was fun.
Since you worked with Disney on that, would you work with them again for your Star Wars?
Well, they certainly aren't asking. As I get older, I become much more precious about my time. So even with the second Hellboy movie, I spent 3 months in pre-production on Hellboy 2, and almost nothing of what I did made any impact on the film. So, while it was cool to be there, it's very nice that they asked. If I had it to do over again, I kind of go, is it okay if I just stay home? You know, if you need me for something, give me a call. But in those 3 months, I could have drawn a comic, or maybe even 2 comics. And then I'd have something to show for that time I spent. The first Hellboy film was really exciting because it was the whole process of, you know, how do we translate this comic into a film? Whereas on the second picture, we'd solved all those big problems already. And already by then, my design sense was so different than Del Toro's design sense that most of what I was coming up with just didn't jive with Del Toro's vision for that film. So it was fine to be there. It's great to have a director who wants you there, but that time could have been, my time could have been better spent doing something else. Though visiting the set is always cool. I like doing that part. In the back.
I was wondering if you were interested in, if you had a chance to direct a Hellboy movie, would you do it?
If I had the chance to direct a Hellboy movie, would I do it? I mean, there was a time there, I think before Frank Miller did The Spirit, where they used to always talk to comics guys and say, hey, maybe you should direct a movie. Frank might have put an end to that. But I can't imagine doing it. It's so much work. The thing I learned sitting next to the director for months at a time is, oh my God, I don't know anything about anything. And everything that goes wrong is the director's responsibility to fix. And everything goes wrong every day, all day long. I mean, and again, I don't know anything about film. Working with Del Toro, when he's talking to the special effects guys, he knows what he's talking about. When he's talking to Guillermo del Toro, the DP, they're talking about lenses. They're talking about all these different things. On the second picture, I was actually there when Danny Elfman was doing the soundtrack, and Del Toro's talking to Danny about music. I mean, I don't know anything about anything, so I would not be qualified to do the job.
Working with Del Toro, would you say some of his artistic talents and ideas would maybe cross over with like your mindset of what you might work with Hellboy and Hell, or just like getting ideas back and forth, talking to them?
No. The one thing I've been very specific about with the comic is at no point will the comic pick up and do anything from the films. If anything, there are things I did in the comic that Del Toro did in the movie, and I said, okay, you did your version of that. I was never going to touch that, but if you've trotted your version out, then I will trot out my version and make it as completely different as possible. I never want that impression that people go, oh, he wants to make it more like the film, because the film's bigger, the film's better. You know, somebody asked me the other day, do you think Del Toro perfected Hellboy? I'm like, he made his version of it, but my version is my version. If anybody's not familiar with this book, I wrote a novel, or co-wrote a novel years ago, and we've been not really adapting it in comics, but the way the novel is structured, there's a big middle stretch of the novel. There's a certain number of years that aren't covered. So the comic series we've been doing at Dark Horse takes place in those missing years. And can't really give too much away, but we're getting pretty near the part where the missing years connect with the end of the novel. So
it's going to end?
Hmm?
It's going to end?
No.
Okay.
I don't want to say too much, but the novel ends in a really interesting way, and our hope is to continue the comic series beyond where the novel ends. Probably wasn't supposed to tell anybody that. Oh well, you didn't hear it from me. Thank you.
Do you think of Hellboy as more of a serial story, or do you see it as a story with an end?
That's a weird one, because I've already killed him, so it's kind of weird. How do you end the series? I can bring him to life and kill him again. That's an idea. There are certain things that need to happen. I think it's even mentioned in Hellboy and Hell, the first issue, or maybe even in the first issue, that there are a certain number of things Hellboy needs to do. So I still have a checklist of things that Hellboy needs to do before we turn out the lights on the entire planet. So, you know, there's that stuff. But it is tricky when you go, well, I know the big climax. I guess it would be the big ending to the Hellboy story. But at what point in your life do you say, uh-oh, I'm starting to feel pretty sick. You know, this might be the end. I better do that story. So I got to figure out a way to tell the whole story without waiting till I'm, you know, so I get the thing that you only have 6 months to live. Better wrap that thing up, 6 months to live. I don't have a certain number of issues that the series is going to be. Hellboy in Hell is so much fun, I can't imagine doing anything else the rest of my career. But it's just finding a way to do the ending and get it out there. I certainly don't trust my descendants to finish the book. Back there.
Yeah, it says that that's all you want to do for the rest of your career, and you said that you wouldn't, you know, ever go and directly work for Marvel and DC. But are there any of those kind of Marvel, DC, heavy hitter characters that you would like to use in a project at all?
Well, that would fall into the I don't want to work for Marvel and DC. Are there any of the Marvel DC things I'd still like to do? The thing is, I was a big Marvel fan when I was a kid, and for the most part, those characters that I have an affection for have been changed so much that they bear no resemblance to what I grew up with. So there are like Marvel characters that might be fun to draw once, but they don't really exist in the Marvel universe anymore. So what I learned a long time ago is, if you really want to draw Ant-Man, don't say yes to drawing an Ant-Man miniseries. Just draw Ant-Man once and get it out of your system. So I might draw some of that shit for fun, but I'm not going to be spending months at a time doing it for those guys. You pick somebody.
Let's go right here.
Easy, I could have done that.
Really just a design decision question. Hellboy's big rock hand obviously has a lot of like thought significance in the long run, but it always sort of struck me as a weird decision just aesthetically. Was that part of the original like Hellboy design, or did you design it and come up with plots and up and stick it on? I always thought it struck me how I like it, but it always struck me weird how asymmetrical it made him.
Well, I like things being asymmetrical. I had no idea what that hand was when I drew it, when I stuck it on him. But again, that's me as a Marvel Comics guy wanting Thor's hammer. Or I wanted something that felt like a Kirby thing. And then you just don't write yourself, in issue 1 you don't say what it is. And then someday you kind of figure out what it is. And you go, oh, all right, eventually I'll figure it out. It was weird to me that for years nobody asked. Nobody ever asked what that hand was. It is strange how many things you can do in a comic and people just go, yep, I guess that's the way it is. In the back of the hat.
Oh, speaking of the hand, and last time you were here, you mentioned you were really influenced by Elric, like the Elric novels. So is the hand,
Michael Moorcock in general, yeah. But yeah.
So is the hand kind of like Stormbringer's and Sword in a way?
Not really. I think when I talk about the Hellboy stuff being influenced by Michael Moorcock, it's more that general kind of doomed hero thing that Michael does really well. I realized at some point, I never realized, or didn't realize for years, how much the Michael Moorcock stuff was the influence until I realized everybody in Hellboy ends up in a pretty bleak, self-sacrificing kind of way. It's not a, hey, let's have fun, let's drink and get girls and go out and rob guys. It's more of a, the universe says you got to do this, and it's going to hurt. That's my purpose? Yes. You're screwed. The universe has decreed that you are screwed. So, and that's in almost everything I've done. So yeah, obviously that, a couple of years where I read everything on Michael's kind of struck a nerve.
I was going to ask you one more. Have you ever read Thomas Ligotti?
I read a little bit, not a lot.
Did you like it at all?
What I read, I liked enough that I've got all his books. But I read very little contemporary fiction. But he's one of those guys I do plan to read more of. You, on the aisle, towards the back.
Just wondering, you're saying it's taking Hellboy and BPA universe a bit more worldwide. Is there any chance we'll see any Australian Aboriginal folklore time coming in?
Sure. Why not? Again, my goal is to touch on everything. I don't know that much about that stuff. Whether I'll deal with that in Hellboy in Hell, which would be doing that stuff in Hellboy in Hell means I can play real fast and loose with it. I would love to do something, because we still do have 50 years of Hellboy running around on Earth, and there are a ton of those stories still to tell. So I would love to do a story about Hellboy in Australia doing that kind of stuff. I just don't know enough about it to write it myself, so I get real nervous about getting stuff wrong. The beauty would be, you know, to team up with an artist who's Australian, who knows the stuff, who says, I want to do a story like this about this kind of stuff. And if he knows more about it than me, cool, that we can work on it together. It was like, you know, the beauty of having Duncan Figueredo do those 3 big books of Hellboy stuff. So much of that was about England, and Duncan is English. So when he was drawing a churchyard or an old church or the landscape, he was selling England better than I could, or some guy who's in, you know, Argentina. You know, having an English guy, I mean, you can't always do stuff like that. And it doesn't necessarily need to be an Australian guy, but somebody who's really fascinated with that stuff, who could bring something to the table, that'd be great. I'd love to do Hellboy with like ninjas, you know, some kind of martial arts kind of thing, but I don't know shit about that stuff. So if you know, if some Frank Miller kind of guy came along and said, hey, I really want to do this big ninja thing, and here's all this stuff that goes into it, I'm like, cool. I'm very happy to co-write it with somebody, and you know, and he brings something to that story. Mustache. That's you.
I was wondering if you could, it seems to me like your universe now is really, really big, and it's really scary, like stuff's going on everywhere. I was wondering if you could talk about how you collaborate those ideas with your different writers, and also maybe if you could touch on like what's going on with the vampires of the world too. That seems very
one thing with the whole expanding Hellboy universe, the one thing I'm desperately trying not to do, and I don't think we have done it yet, is do a series of books where to understand this book, you have to read this book. Ideally, if you only want to read BPRD, you never need to read Hellboy. If you only want to read Ape Sapien, you don't want to, you don't necessarily need to read Hellboy or BPRD. Because I don't want to trick the audience. It's not a scam to see if I can make everybody buy everything else. We're not going to do those big crossover things. I grew up reading the Marvel comic stuff in, you know, the mid-70s, I guess, where it still felt like it was a cool universe, and if you read more of the books, you got a bigger picture of that big world, but you didn't need to read all the books. So it's a richer world and a more filled out history the more books you read. But you know, I'm the architect of the mythology. I'm the kind of the keeper of how the supernatural works and the mythology end of stuff works. John Arcudi, you know, can't make heads or tails of that stuff. Nobody can, because it's all in my head. I've had the various discussions with them, but for the most part, the character stuff, I turned those characters over to John and said, you're in charge of what these characters do. I'm the guy throwing lightning bolts at the planet and saying this is going to turn into this and that's going to turn into that. But John's focus is, what does that actually do to these guys that are down there on the ground? And same with Ape Sapien. I've got the big cosmic overview stuff kind of mapped out. And the history stuff too. How the Victorian era stuff works, how the Hyperborean stuff and the creation of the world, all that stuff. I've kind of figured all that shit out. And as these guys are coming up with their stories, I'm kind of going, hey, can we stick this bit of mythology? Can we get the origin of the vampires in here? So I've worked on all of that stuff, but I don't want to turn this thing into a history lesson. So it's just finding a way to get that stuff in there. And you know, Scott Alley will call me, you know, about something John wrote or something somebody else wrote and said, does this jive with, you know, your big view? Every once in a while I'll write a really long email and say, hey, here's how all the vampire shit works. Or here's how the Hyperborea stuff works. But, you know, as soon as I write that, I kind of go, oh yeah, and here's this 10,000 other pages of shit that I keep making up. So I'm the keeper of that stuff, and I make their job much more difficult. As far as
what's going on with the vampires?
With vampires, I'm trying to think if there's stuff I can give away.
Yeah. It seems like they're coping with
the vampire. I realize vampires are my favorite monster. John Cloutier refused to write vampires because he didn't like them. Which is why we had to, Scott Alley and I did this story at Pickens County, where we got some of the history of the vampire stuff. Because I realized, and there's a story I did with Scott Hampton that had a little bit of the history of the vampire stuff. I realized I hadn't done much with vampires, and I thought, well, why hasn't Hellboy dealt with vampires very much? Oh, because at some point, and this is true, at some point, colleges in Paris and Moscow were lecturing in the 1700s. They were lecturing about vampires. And my feeling was, if vampires are out there having a field day, killing people, as soon as people start teaching classes on how to track down and kill vampires, the oldest vampires are going to go, well, screw this shit, let's go into hiding. So that was my thing for the Hellboy universe, that at some point a bunch of these vampires got together and said, let's keep our head down. And we'll continue to prey on human beings, do it in a much more secretive way, and we'll stash the bodies away. So they're basically incubating vampires. So we got whole fields, and we saw it in Pickens County, we got whole fields of unawakened vampires, you know, growing mold, you know, underground someplace. And on the great day, when the great day comes, we'll say the magic word or whatever the hell, however the hell it works, and they'll all wake up and we'll take over the planet. As soon as human beings have, you know, are completely convinced that there's no vampires, then we'll wake up and we'll take over the world. But because we fucked up the planet so much, shit is actually happening to those vampires that are buried underground, and they're turning into like fields of, you know, gaseous mushroom creatures. That's funny. Yellow shirt.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to say I really loved the Joe Gollum and the Drowning City story you wrote. And I was wondering if there was any plans to continue that a la Lord Baltimore kind of thing.
You know, the problem, I would love to do it, and Chris Golden would really, really love to do it. Joe Gollum and the Drowning City, if you don't know, is a novel that Chris Golden and I co-wrote. I'd love to do that. The trouble is, we do not want to put out so many books that the audience starts complaining that because everybody knows, as much as everybody hates Marvel and DC, they buy all those comics. So they've only got X amount of money left over for their Dark Horse books. So we can't expand much more than we are. I mean, I could put out twice as many Hellboy universe books. We could spin off things from Baltimore. We could do Joe Gollum, but then the audience starts going, too many comics. So we're trying to keep it to roughly a book a week, I think. You know, so 4, maybe 5 books a month coming out of the, you know, Mignola universe. Even though Baltimore and Joe Gollum don't relate to the Hellboy stuff, it still kind of gets lumped into, oh, that's the Mignola stuff. So to do Joe Gollum means something else would have to go away. And the Hellboy universe is the thing that organically keeps wanting to expand. So unless you start pounding Dark Horse with letters saying, no, we want more of these books, then we have to kind of draw the line someplace. You on the aisle.
Reading the Hellboy series, I automatically sense a very large pulp influence in aspects of the 1930s pulp, but mixed with more modern aspects of the occult. But I'm wondering, more attracted to that pulp feel, especially with Lobster Johnson, is like, how exactly does that work in a modern age? Like, how does one write pulp in this modern world?
Well, you need to have read it when you were 13 years old. You need to have read that. For me, at least, my feeling is I needed to have soaked up all that stuff when I was at that age to soak up all that stuff. And right now, if you write that pulp stuff the way it was written in the 30s, it's going to be boring as shit. But if you keep it in your head from when you were 13 years old, and you supercharge it with a lot of Jack Kirby comics, you come out with something that feels like that stuff without being a slavish imitation of that stuff. I have no idea, a lot of guys are doing The Shadow and Doc Savage and stuff like that. I have no idea how those comics are written. I don't know how faithful they are to the source material. But you need to supercharge it to sell it to an audience today. And I've seen various attempts over the years where guys have come in and said, I've done this shadow series that's really faithful to the old stuff. Yawn, nobody buys it, except, you know, those increasingly dying off guys who are fans of the old radio show. So you need, I hate to say modernize it, but you need to amp it up a little bit. And yeah, I am influenced by some of that pulp stuff. It's not the biggest influence, except if you look at the horror pulp stuff, you know, I'm a big fan of that stuff. Not so much the hero stuff. I went through a phase with the pulp hero stuff. But my feeling is also with the Hellboy universe, everything I like, I needed my version of it. I need my Sherlock Holmes kind of guy. I need my, you know, Lobster Johnson is my stand-in for all those pulp heroes. So anything I like, I want to make my version of. Which is why I don't need to draw the Lone Ranger. I don't need to draw Doc Savage. I don't need to draw whatever, you know, all these other characters. I just made up my own version. And with the goggles.
Do you think you'd ever be open to having another Weird Tales sort of thing where you'd have people from all over comics write stories that aren't in continuity about the Mignola?
Yeah, if anybody's not familiar with the Weird Tales series, that happened while I was doing the first movie because I was not involved in the comic at all. I just didn't have time, and we wanted to keep Hellboy alive out there. So we created this book, Weird Tales, where people theoretically who knew, you know, would do their versions of Hellboy without having to be in continuity. And I gotta say, I think it was a mixed bag, because some guys really took advantage of the fact that they didn't need to do a Mignola-style story. And half of the guys tried to do something that was very Mignola-ish. And I wanted stuff that none of it felt like me. I just wanted guys who had completely different takes on the material to play fast and loose with my stuff. Other than this weekend, I've never heard anybody reference the Weird Tales stuff in years. Maybe it was a much bigger thing in Canada, I guess. So it's never really occurred to me. I mean, really, I'm much more interested in expanding, if we're going to do an expanding the real Hellboy world. There's so many different things to do with the real Hellboy world. The last thing I want to do is confuse the issues, saying, you know, these are imaginary stories. I know they're all imaginary stories, but within imaginary stories, these are the imaginary stories that don't count. I have no interest in doing that. Yeah.
Where does your fascination with the occult come from, and do you believe any of the stories that you've heard, or is there one that kind of scares you in any way?
Well, I've never written anything that, I mean, well, actually, no, there's some stuff that Richard Corbin drew that I went, ooh, that's creepy. It was only Richard who actually turned some of my stories into things that were actually creepy, which is cool. I don't believe in anything enough that it interferes with the way I do my business. I did have an interesting night. Del Toro decided there was one night in London that we were going to stake out a haunted place. So that's spending a night in a haunted hotel room with Guillermo del Toro and Danny Elfman is a pretty weird benefit of having done those movies. Yeah, Hellboy 2, that was fine. But what was really cool is we spent that night in that haunted hotel room. So I'm not a huge believer in that stuff. But when Del Toro decided we were each going to spend a half an hour in the room alone, I wasn't the first guy going, oh boy, let's do that. And then my phone rang in the middle of that half hour. It was like 2 in the morning, and the phone rings. It's Chris Golden calling from America. What are you doing? First off, I'm wetting my pants. I'm sitting in a haunted hotel room staring in a mirror at myself, which is a bad way to spend a half hour. So yeah, I don't have, you know, I'm not tripping over any kind of belief. So I don't have my can't touch this, can't touch that. I get to play fast and loose with all the mythology and all the occult stuff without worrying that I'm actually, you know, conjuring anything up. I did, I think there's only one case where I wrote an occult formula. It was in a book called The Crooked Man. I had a page to fill. So I had a witch tell how you create witch balls. Because I just happened to have a book that had the recipe for it. And I played a little fast and loose with the recipe, just in case. You know? So I didn't give you the whole story on how to make those. blue shirt.
What's your level of involvement with the new book from Martin Franco?
None. Other than saying, well, and actually, I had even less than usual, because that was one where I went, well, I don't know, and my wife said, yeah, I like that, do that. So she's in the back, and she's responsible. So if anybody thinks that thing is ruining the Hellboy universe, take it up with the lady in the back. But I mean, the thing is, I see so many young kids who are fans of Hellboy because of the animation, because of the TV show. I thought it'd be great to have a book that people could give to their kids. And, you know, I like that it's still called Hellboy, as opposed to it's Heckboy or anything, you know. Because still that Hell name is a much bigger stumbling block than I ever thought it would be. So it's nice to have something that's still called Hellboy, but it really is, you know, kid-friendly. And I like what they do. Racer.
Speaking of like all this collaboration and everything, are there any artists that haven't drawn Hellboy that you would really like to see draw Hellboy?
Yes. But I can't name them because I'm afraid I'll scare them off, or they'll be calling me tomorrow. Right now, we don't have a place for some of these guys to come in and do the stuff. I'm hoping that's going to change. Hellboy is tricky though, because Hellboy, not that we need somebody who imitates me, there are a certain number of things that a guy drawing Hellboy kind of needs to do. Duncan was a perfect fit for Hellboy, but it's not like BPRD. I felt we could go really fast and, you know, really go with a radically different style. With Hellboy, there's certain things I'm looking for with, you know, a guy who can draw that character. But there are a lot of good guys out there, so I'm hoping, you know, we'll find other guys. Because Duncan is doing other things, and he's done a beautiful graphic novel that's coming out in a couple months. But, you know, he's been on Hellboy for 7 years. I think he's enjoying taking a break. Yes?
Would you ever get to a point where you would want to retire from Hellboy and let somebody else take
Where I
over?
would want to retire from Hellboy? Do it myself. I mean, yeah, I can't say it would never happen, but I'm having so much, I mean, especially now that he's dead, especially now that Hell is whatever I want it to be, I just can't imagine what else I would do. Anything I can think of, I can do in that book. So unless I get to a point where I go, you know, I've just had it, I don't want to draw comics anymore, which I guess could happen, I just can't imagine not doing it. I think, you know, more likely, if there comes a time where people go, we just refuse to buy your comic, well, then I guess I'm retired. But,
I guess my question was more so with like Del Toro's take, and then the comic books, and now the weird tales. And would you ever be comfortable stepping away from it and seeing other people, or is that yours?
well, I can't imagine letting someone else write it, because nobody knows the story. I mean, I know the story. It's so much my thing. I would have to, unless I was dead, I would have to micromanage it. And I just wouldn't put another writer through that horror of having to deal with me on that book. It's bad enough with the other guys that I, you know, have to tell them, you know, make sure we remember this, or you got the name of this thing wrong, or, you know. I like, if I'm working with other guys, I want to hire guys and let them do what they do. I don't want to hire a guy and say, now do what I do. But Hellboy's mine. You know, Hellboy's my baby. I just can't imagine saying, I don't give a shit. Just do whatever you want. Yeah.
Any chance we're going to see any more Screw on Head?
Not as a comic. Though some upcoming Hellboys get relatively close to the stories that are in that amazing Screw on Head collection. There, a long time ago, you know, somebody else did pick up the rights to do animation. Nothing has surfaced, so there's no word, there hasn't been any word in years about anything happening with that. But of all the things I've done, Screw on Head was the one that I got it right the first time, and I just said, you know, that's everything I want to do with that character. I could try to come up with other stories, and people go, yeah, that was fine. It's not nearly as good as the first one. You know, some things take on a life of their own, and some things, they're there for a certain amount of time, and then they go, I'm done. And you go, oh, that's it for that. So I don't want to mess with it. How long is it?
I think we got time for about one more.
Okay, cool. I mean, I could do this all day, but I just, you know. figured all you guys need to go someplace else. Yeah.
I always felt like a lost soul for like a long time, and he's kind of hidden from the things that people are telling him he has to be. Now that he has all this information about his own nature, what is driving him? Like, is there going to be some point where he's just going to have to go forward as antagonist? Or
Yeah, what's driving Hellboy? It becomes a really interesting question I hadn't really thought about, you know, especially after you kill the guy. What's his motivation for getting up in the morning since he's already dead? I don't know. It is one of the joys of doing this stuff is kind of figuring that stuff out as I go. And at the risk of sounding like a lunatic, there are things that happen where you just go, oh, that's what you want to do? Oh, that's where you want to go? You let the character kind of inform where things are going to go. So as much as my original intention with Hellboy and Hell was just throw him into hell and then start adapting old myths and folktales, there's a part of me that's still going, yeah, and then this means this, and this connects to that. And I'm like, I don't want to turn it into a gigantic epic. I want it to be small, little, self-contained stories. But the engine that runs this thing is always stitching all these bits together into a big story. So since we are relatively early on in this whole new phase of Hellboy's career, he's still kind of finding his way. So it is very much like starting the book over again, and you know, introducing entirely new situations, entirely new cast of characters. So it's exciting to be on the ground floor of this thing again. One more. All right. Oh, okay. Back.
Have you ever written anything that later on you wish that you hadn't into the story, and then if so, were you able to get it out?
Yeah, you know, that's one thing I'm really proud of, is that in 20 years of doing it, we've never really written ourselves into a corner where we had to go, oh, let's, you know, never mind. I mean, it's hit a few dead ends in a few places, but for the most part, what's much more common is I write something that isn't meant to go anywhere, and then a year later I go, oh, you know what that means? Or, oh, that little pig guy that's living in a bush, you know what that guy can do? So it's much more common that the other happens, that these nothing little things turn into something. And the Scarlet Witch, because you got cut off?
Oh, no worries. I didn't realize we were anything. But just to follow the vampire question earlier, I was just wondering if we're ever going to see, I know we have all these mushroom vampires that we saw in Kings County, but I'm wondering if we'll see some of the, like the 1940s vampires, like the ones you designed in that series, if we're going to see those in the present, or if we're still looking at dealing with them kind of in flashbacks.
There's a lot to be done with vampires. Whether they take place now, then, or whatever. I love the whole vampire stuff. I've come up with a whole bunch of vampire stuff. I'm not exactly sure when they'll take place. And I don't know if anybody's seen it, but Gabriel Ba and Fabio Moon have done this wonderful series. It was my idea to do this series, BPRD Vampire. And the idea is a character that they created in BPRD 1947. I said, I love this character. We've given them I've come up with, I think Josh Dicehart and I came up with a really screwed up situation for this particular guy. And we have no room for him in the regular book. We have no long-term plan for this guy. So I went to Gabriel and Fabio, who are geniuses, and I said, I'd love for you guys to take this character, if you want, and do whatever you want with him. Here's my idea for how we start with that guy, but I have no idea where that guy ends up. So they've done this beautiful, very bizarre, very cool 5-issue miniseries to be collected in a few months, I guess. And I'm begging them to come back and do more, because especially the way they ended it, it's like, okay, now really I have no idea what the hell to do with this guy. So my hope there is that they have a book that they can come back to anytime they want and continue that guy's story. All I've given them is my take on the origins of vampires in the Hellboy universe, to use however they want. I guess that's all it quits.
I think that concludes the panel, and I believe Mike is going to be signing up in Dark Horse.
So any more questions, and I'll be there tomorrow too, so any more questions anybody has, just come and ask me. Cool, thank you.
Thank you so much.